Welcome to Science Seminar Series. For those of you who don't know me, psychology students and things like that, I'm Christopher Malcolm. I'm in the Department of Geography and Environment. And we have Dr. Pamela Rutherford on the tech from biology. We're running the Science Seminar Series this term. Often I do the introduction for the speaker, but I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to let someone else do it. But I'll just mention before that, next week we have Dr. Abdel Al-Abdallah from here downstairs on the first floor at Brown University. And he's if you have the schedule in front of you, he's actually changed his title to Complex Lie Groups and Their Analytic Structures. So he's changed, so he has a bit of a different talk next week than what's on the Science Seminar Series schedule. But I'm going to let Dr. Wache introduce Dr. Limongi here, and then we'll get going, and we'll have questions after.
Thank you very much, Chris. All right, hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas Watse. I'm in the Department of Psychology, and it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Roberto Limongi. He has a PhD in brain and cognitive sciences, who recently joined Brandon University as an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology. He's establishing the Writing Brain Laboratory dedicated to the study of the cognitive, computational, and neural mechanisms of the effect of writing on the brain and the mind. And I appreciate that distinction between brain and mind, and I imagine those who are dualists in the audience as well. His most important contributions have been published in Biological Psychology, Schizophrenia Research, Schizophrenia Bulletin, Neuroimage, and Journal of Writing Research. He recently published The Mental Chronometry Theory of Writing to Learn, a work which he received the 2020 and 2022 John R. Hayes Award for Excellence in Writing Research. So I'll let Dr. Limongi take it away.
Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure to be here. And it's also a challenge, because every time anybody from the field of free energy, and free energy in the sense of the mathematical formulation of how the brain, we suppose, works, everybody speaks about it, has to make a compromise between the rigorosity of mathematics, if we can say it's rigorous at all, and the importance of being effective communicator in conveying the basic concept of this. And more when it comes to some sensitive area, which is writing and language, which is also an interdisciplinary object of study. So from the human sciences, you know, biological sciences, computational sciences. And in that intersection, sometimes it's difficult to conciliate because there are many different perspectives, and I will do my best. And from that effort, I will try to be as less math-driven as possible. Just one single equation I will show, promise. And I will try to make a qualitative description of it, just to make the case. If I don't know you, I apologize, most of you, but if one of you or more, a few of you are more inclined to the mathematical part of it, I am very happy to sit with them or with you and just play with the equation on the board, on a sheet of paper afterwards. So I will try to behave myself in terms of the mathematics part of this. So, and during the last years, 5 years approximately, I've been working in parallel in two research areas, in the areas of psychiatry, neuropsychiatry specifically, schizophrenia and psychosis, and in the area of writing in the academic writing, for many reasons. And although in appearance, these two areas seem to be parallel, independent, they have some convergence. And that convergence is about language in schizophrenia and language as written language in the academia. And that convergence is what saves my life in terms of the energy I put in both of these research lines. So I will try to combine these two areas here. And the way I prepared this talk was in these bullets. First, I will briefly describe some experimental data showing that there is a superiority effect of writing, the fact that we write, over speaking, and the effect on learning. So I will show one specific data to support that. But then we need an explanation for that. An explanation that phenomenologically might seem evident, but it needs rigorous scientific demonstration. And that is the problem of this superiority effect of written language. But because I work in the area of schizophrenia and psychosis, especially in the aspect of language, we can use language and schizophrenia as an analog model to study the superiority effect of writing to learn. And this will be the second point. In that point, we'll speak to a false assumption that most clinicians have in the area of schizophrenia, in clinical psychology and psychiatry in general, about the role of language for the diagnosis and the follow-up of interventions in psychology. And that assumption, that false assumption, the alternative to it, is what will allow me to explain or provide some hypothesis about that superiority effect of writing, which is no more than changing, learning, a changing conceptual organization. And that is when I will show, that point, that simple equation, just one, promise. And from there, I will show the neural evidence, the neuroscientific evidence to that explanation. And then I will go with more concrete example in the classroom about the translational application of this neural explanation and the mathematical explanation that I find here, with some interesting implication in the area of very well known by you, the artificial intelligence and the crisis of academic writing. People are scared about academic writing when it comes to artificial intelligence, and maybe there are good hopes and optimism about that. And then my current and future directions. So this is what I learned in high school, that human primates, if we can consider ourselves primates, have some advantage, evolutionary advantage over other mammals and other primates in the development, evolutionary development of the brain. And that appears to be one of the reasons, if not the reason, why we have the language as we know it. I mean, human language. We all know that animals, most species communicate, but human language, only humans. And it appears to be caused by specific evolutionary development or evolutions in the brain, specifically in the frontal cortex, also referred to as the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, because it's a region of the cognitive control. So we all know this. But let's now make a thought example of what would happen in terms of communication in the classroom, like here. We can have two ways to communicate. One is speaking and the other is writing. And imagine we are in a class and I am a professor of geometry and I'm teaching the Pythagorean theorem. And I can ask two different ways to students to demonstrate their knowledge about the Pythagorean theorem. One is asking, please, can you say aloud the relationship between the Pythagorean theorem and a triangle? The other way is to ask the student to write an essay explaining their opinion or some thoughts about the relationship between the Pythagorean theorem and the triangles. So we have two ways to do that, speaking or writing. Now let's try to move this classroom scenario into a cognitive psychology laboratory in which I will be able to measure the response time for a specific question after the student writes or speaks aloud. For example, that the Pythagorean theorem establishes the relationship between the length of the sides of the right triangle. So there is the production. Could be spoken or written. And then I can give the student a prompt, like a question. Please tell me if the following word is associated with the concept that you are studying in class. For example, the following phrase is related to the Pythagorean theorem, right triangles, shown on a computer screen. And the student takes less if the student has previously written something about the Pythagorean theorem than if the student had spoken pretty much the same structure. So this difference in reaction time, you can see it's at no more than 20 milliseconds. But 20 milliseconds, when it comes to the brain, is my life in terms of, it's a lifetime in that sense. And you will see the difference later on. So this is exactly what we did with an actual experiment a few years ago, in which we asked students to read a text, and then they created a spoken summary or a written summary, and then they perform a memory task about the content of the text they just read. And we found that difference, the difference between the reaction time, the time they took to retrieve the knowledge from the memory after reading and after speaking and after writing. And we found the difference that you have seen here. Both had the same, statistically speaking, the same accuracy. They were correct in answering. But when they wrote about the text they just read, they were able to answer, to retrieve the knowledge much faster than when they spoke. That was what we call in that word the superiority effect of writing over speaking. And the third author of the paper called it the epistemic effect of that. It's called epistemic writing, the activity, and the epistemic effect is that effect of being able to increase or decrease the retrieval time from memory. That is the fact that I wanted to show. But the problem is why that's happened. So what are the causes of this superiority effect of language? And then speaks to language in general as a communicative device, as a communicative tool. And this is when I moved to the field of psychiatry in language and schizophrenia. If any of us goes to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a therapist or a counselor to express our feelings, I feel bad, I feel anxious, I feel depressed. So the first thing the psychiatrist or psychologist is going to do is to run an interview and to ask us some questions, and we will answer the questions. And from that interaction, the psychiatrist may come up with a diagnosis eventually. So they rely on the spoken language to infer the thoughts of the patient, of the client, to infer the thought based on the spoken language, something like this. Imagine if you are going to a psychiatrist and, hey, can you describe me what you see in this picture? And well, in that picture, I can see flowers in a pot. Well, the flowers are in the pot. Oh, it's a flowers with a pot. So from here, the psychiatry can start investigating what's going on inside the mind of the subject. But that mind, the content of the mind is unobservable. They rely on the language or the produced language. There is the common way to go. There is no exception to a rule. There is no biological tracer. There is no blood test at the initial interview. And from there, they come up with a diagnosis. And this relies on one assumption. In the classic model of language production. In the classic model of language production, without trying to be here more specific in terms of linguistics, in the mind, we have a series of concepts. The organization of our worldview, the conceptual organization. And we create a message as a subset of those concepts. That message is then transformed into words. And those words is then put out through the mouth, through motor responses in terms of discourse, a text. So the assumption here is that this message is the same as the words that we speak. There is a common assumption. And from here, the psychologist and the psychiatrist infers the concepts, the organization of the mind. That is the assumption, the common assumption. And this is what we can find in any diagnostic manual. The DSM-5, any manual that we have, exactly the same. They infer what's going on inside the mind of the patient, given what they hear and in terms of words. In schizophrenia in particular, there is a collection, a set of symptoms, hallucination, hearing voices where there are no voices, or delusions, sticking to false belief. No, it's summer. Yeah, or no, can you see the snow? No, but it's summer out there. Well, to me it is, by the way, given the statistics in Manitoba. But that's not a delusion. Well, it's delusion. There is another set of symptoms called conceptual disorganization. So the opposite of being organized. So what is conceptual disorganization? From that conceptual disorganization, the psychiatrist can diagnose formal thought disorder, for example, one of the most severe symptoms in schizophrenia. So this is what they do. And they do it through language. This is the rubric from one of the diagnostic tools, the positive scale of schizophrenia P2. It's a positive symptom. I will not go into the details. And they refer to conceptual disorganization, thinking in circumstantial, tangential, or paralogical. There is some difficulty in directing thoughts toward a goal and some losing association. And then you have from 1 to 7. And always they refer in terms of communication. Given this 7-point scale, they can come up with a diagnosis, at least with these symptoms, about formal thought disorder, given the language. Healthy controls, this is first episode schizophrenia. Healthy control are absent. So they don't show any of these symptoms. This is what they do. And it's fairly clear. There is some people that fall here and other group of people that do not fall here. But because we need to come up with some definition of what that conceptual organization is whether something like this. A conceptually organized mind is like the Robbins libraries, where you go there and you quickly can retrieve a book. However, if you go to my office, even if I have just a handful of books in my office, so I'm pretty much more disorganized. So my office, now I'm going to slightly introduce the concept of entropy. It's more disorganized or chaotic than the library. So phenomenologically, we can define conceptual disorganization as like my office, and the opposite to it, conceptual organization, the library. But we will go into a more formal definition later on. So, and because we rely on words to infer that that hidden or unobserved conceptual organization or the lack thereof, disorganization, we can use specific cues, linguistic cues, or extract linguistic cues from the discourse of the patient, and that is sometimes referred to as the analytic thinking score. So we can pick some specific preposition, adverbs, adjectives, verbs, pronouns to infer that level of conceptual organization. And we can create another scale, the analytic thinking score. From 0, very disorganized, my office, or the mind of a schizophrenia patient, or highly organized, one right and perfect grad student who wants to graduate soon and write perfectly and goes consistently to the library where everything is perfectly organized. So these are the two extremes. Using a scale here, from 0 to 100. And indeed, we can classify people, given this scale of analytic thinking score, we can classify people between highly disorganized with a low analytic thinking score and highly organized, like healthy controls. Everything looks good here so far, but there is a problem that we noticed 2 or 3 years ago, analyzing some data. Here you have the variability among patients, and here you have the variability among healthy controls, those who do not show any symptom, but they still show a huge variability in that analytic thinking score, meaning that something subclinical is happening here, or is indicating here that even though they are not diagnosed with the pathology, schizophrenia or psychosis, just basically, they show differential levels of organization in those thoughts given the linguistic cues and indexed by that analytic thinking score. To us, that was very striking. We didn't expect that. We expect a very low variability here, and we call it here subclinical conceptual disorganization. It's like us. I mean, if I run the analytic thinking score among you, you will have some variability, and some of you will be subclinical, some of you will not be subclinical, will be highly organized, assuming that there is not diagnosis here. But it was striking, and that made us reflect upon that assumption about how the psychiatrists were thinking in terms of the language production, and revisit that assumption. This is the assumption. The assumption is that we have concepts, some conceptual organization. We put this concept into words. Put your concept into words. Put your thoughts into words, and then write them down, for example, or create a discourse. And then we speak, we write, and from the writing or the speech production, somebody else infer our thoughts, assuming that what they hear or read is exactly a map of it's an exact map of our mind. But there is another perspective. There is the alternative model. The alternative model is that as we speak, as we start producing the words, we simultaneously are restructuring that organization in our minds. That's the other assumption. So we still can produce the words, but during the production process, we are reorganizing this concept. The consequence of this is something like this. It's like, I'm trying to change my concepts until reaching a specific organization that describes what I see in the picture. So it's that conceptual reorganization. Let's move with this model to see what happens then. This is what happens. What happens is that this is the classic assumption, and this is the alternative model. The point is that once we read or hear what the speaker or writer is saying or writing, doesn't match exactly the actual organization in the mind of the writer. So in other words, what I am saying right now, following this model, is not exactly the same as what I am thinking right now. So if you rely on what I am saying to infer my internal thoughts, you are failing. I mean, I'm thinking something different, even if you simultaneously can hear my voice. This will be the immediate implication of that. So what we hear or read in a text certainly encodes a message, certainly, but not the current concept organization of the speaker or writer. However, that production, that speech or the writing has some cues, and from those cues, we can infer or estimate what's going on in the mind of the subject. But this takes us to a more formal definition of that. Remember that example of the Robbins library, in which I said that the high conceptual organization is the library and the low conceptual organization is my office. So we can define this in terms of entropy, chaos. And this is the only equation that I will show you. Chaos, entropy, this one, is no more the part of one bigger construct, which is the free energy principle of how the brain works. The free energy principle, different from the free energy principle of thermodynamics, is another. So it's different. It's more computational, information theory. And it says no more than we have in our mind, we have different concepts, different possibilities of how the world is. And depending on the confidence that we put onto each of these possibilities, we have certain level of uncertainty, which is no more another way to say entropy. In the case of high conceptual organization, there is a high probability, almost one, that this is the actual representation of the world. Whereas in the case of very low conceptual organization with high entropy, close to one, there is more ambiguous representations here. So this is why you can see that a patient with schizophrenia can start say, well, this is a table here, where a table? Yes, it's a table, but, and then start derailing and speaking about something else then they go back to speak about the table. And the clinician starts saying, he's directly. Check in the rubric, in the DSM-5, for example. So but we can express this level of conceptual organization as a formal mathematical expression in terms of entropy, in more general sense, in terms of free energy. And the principle of these free energies is easy to understand qualitatively. Something like this. I am navigating the world right now, and I am perceiving the world. And if I perceive a contradiction between my conceptual organization of the world and my sensor information, that's a discrepancy. That discrepancy creates some conflict, which is no more another way to say that there is some uncertainty. And I need to resolve that. I resolve that by engaging in an action. One action is language production. By producing the language, I can reorganize my concepts and match the concepts in my mind with the sensor information that I am receiving from the world. This is the qualitative description of the free energy principle. I mean, this is described qualitatively, but mathematically it's no more than a decrease as I speak. I will decrease the free energy, which is no more another way to say that I decrease the uncertainty of or the entropy in the conceptual organization of my mind. This is and I will stick to my promise. The only equation I will show this one. So we can define this conceptual organization or the lack thereof in terms of entropy or free energy. And this is no more than would be happen given that model. Let's go up again back to the example of the person who is describing the photo on the monitor. As the person speaks, it has certain level of conceptual organization in their mind with a high level of entropy. As the person speaks, the entropy starts decreasing. In that picture, there is a flower until producing the final string of words. At this very end point, for example, this is just a snippet of it. The entropy inside the mind of the patient, in this case, will be very low because the patient is producing words and restructuring the conceptual organization. And we can certainly expect that in healthy people. If we are able to estimate, and we are, that entropy at the beginning of the language production, here, in healthy control people, let's say my prior conceptual organization between 0 and 1 is 0.75, is the 1 minus entropy. Entropy is sorry, here. And then my posterior, at the very end of the language production, the conceptual organization increased 0.9, from 0.75, 0.9, meaning that the entropy, the high entropy here, decreased here. In the case, however, of schizophrenia, back, here. In the case, however, of schizophrenia patient, the conceptual organization at the beginning is very low, 0.1, meaning that the entropy is very high. At the very end is even lower, even more disorganized. And this is associated with that analytic thinking score, the linguistic cues that we can extract from the discourse. In the case of the schizophrenia patient, is lower the score than in the case of the healthy control patient. So far we can say, well, why do you need that entropy term instead of relying on the analytic thinking score? And we'll see why in a minute, based on the evidence of the neural evidence. Now we say that there is some association between that analytic thinking score, the higher analytic thinking score, the higher conceptual organization, the higher conceptual organization, the lower the entropy in terms of the mathematical model. But does it happen in the brain at all? So remember, entropy is no more than another way to say uncertainty. In the brain, this is what we started to look 2 years ago. In the brain, this is a much older paper. In the brain, there are 2 regions. I will just name them just for reference. The anterior cingulate cortex in the medial frontal lobe and the anterior insular cortex also in the frontal lobe. You have it here, the insula and cingulate cortex. When a person inside the scanner, which we run an fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, observe some stimuli that are uncertain or that elicit some uncertainty, those two regions start activating the brain. For example, in the upper condition, you have something that is very predictable. You can easily predict when my fist is going to hit the other fist. You can even tap the floor when it fits. However, in the lower condition, I introduce a gap and then continuity. I introduce some uncertainty. When I introduce this uncertainty in the lower condition, the activity of these regions increased. This is what allowed us to identify the uncertainty regions in the brain. We are not the only ones to do it, but we are the first in establishing the association between these two regions and what comes next, the disorganization in schizophrenia, which is here. When the person, in this case, the schizophrenia patient, is looking at the picture, the patient has two different possible representations, and he has a conflict decided between which of these two representations is the one that matches the external stimuli. This is the conflict that the patient or the healthy control subject needs to resolve. And because there is a conflict, the activity of these two regions increases. And there is one region that detects the uncertainty, and there is another region that resolves the uncertainty. And what happened is that in the case of the healthy control people, the connectivity indexed by the thickness of the arrows between the two regions is smaller, is weaker here from the anterior insular cortex, which conveys information about the uncertainty, and the cingulate cortex, which resolves the uncertainty. However, in the case of schizophrenia patient, the thickness, the arrow, indicate that the strength of the connectivity is even stronger in that sense, meaning that he's struggling to resolve the conflict. And this is also associated with the analytic thinking score. You have the high analytic thinking score, high conceptual organization in the healthy control subject, and you have a very low, compared to this one, analytic thinking score in the schizophrenia subject. So we have the linguistic signatures, the analytic thinking score, the formal, the mathematical signature, the computational signatures, the entropy value, and then we have neural signatures here at three levels of analysis, if that is the case. Now we can go back to the problem of why is it that writing has a superiority effect compared to speaking in the classroom and in the laboratory. What we did was, if this is true in language in general, it might happen also in writing. And then we didn't have, and we are setting up the equipment to do that. There the opportunity to test this neurobiologically, but we can certainly estimate that entropy index given the analytic thinking score of the written samples. And this is exactly what we did. With a sample of writing that I collected 2 years ago, students wrote systematically over the semester different papers, like essays, for example. We call it epistemic writing, just to be more precise with that. And at the end, we computed the entropy value per student. And we associated the entropy value, the average over 10 submissions, the entropy value with the grade of questions independently asked in exams about the same concepts they wrote about during the epistemic writing. So they wrote here, but they were asked questions about this concept in the exams. We estimated the entropy value from this writing samples, and from the entropy values, we established the association with the grades. And indeed, this is what we found. We created 3 models and see which model best explain the data. The first model is the classic model that we use in class. We ask students to write an essay, and then we use a rubric in which introduction, body, conclusion, grammar, coherence, cohesion, the direct tenses. Roberto is, in terms of Roberto strikes, for example. This is a classic model. Let's call it, sorry, the classic one. Another model is only using the linguistic cues. Linguistic cues are, for example, the proportion of pronouns, prepositions that the student use in their writing. And from there, we estimated the grades, or we associated the grades. And the other is, from the linguistic cues, we estimated, using that free energy model, the entropy value. And from the entropy value, we associated causally with the grades. So these are causal models. These are not correlational, those causal models in the Bayesian sense. And what we found is that in model 1, this one, the explanatory power of the model was way higher than the other 2, meaning that this term is the actual predictor of the grades, and this term is estimated from the observed linguistic cues. This term is not directly observable, but we can estimate it using that free energy model from the speech production of the writing samples, and from there we can use as an index of learning. This is what we did, and now this is the explanation. The explanation is that with the entropy value, we can estimate the learning or the change in the conceptual organization inside the mind of the subject. And now we asked, well, is it worth teaching students to write? Right. Let me go back to that example of the write something about the Pythagorean theorem, or speak something about the Pythagorean theorem. So the student can just go to the computer and go to GPT-4 or any chatbot, give me an essay about the Pythagorean theorem. So and then they turn in the essay. Okay, fantastic. Let me try and create another example, given one of the epistemic writings that I collected 2 years ago from a student. And I just did this during the last 2 or 3 days. And I had help of a great colleague from the Department of Psychology who is a fan of GPT-4. And I am not, but he is. And I asked him to do that. So this is what I did. I had the sample of the epistemic writings from that student. I wrote an email to the student asking, hey, can I use those samples to create an example of what I'm trying to do? And sure, you can. And then the student was a student from research methods in cognitive psychology. And in that class, in some class, I discussed the topic of the difference between the mean and the standard deviation, like in any statistics class, but this class was research methods. And I asked the student to write a short essay about which of the 2 concepts is more important in statistics, like an opinion. And the students wrote the concept. Before that, they had written a bunch of epistemic writing activities. I don't remember exactly where they were for this example, were 8 or it was the 10th epistemic writing. But I had a sample, like taking blood sample from the patient. So, and I got the answer. And the answer was, I estimated the entropy value from that answer, given the previous epistemic writings from the study. And well, the student could have just gone, 2 years ago, GPT-4 was not out, but if that were today, and asked GPT-4, hey, can you tell me which of these 2 concepts is more important, the mean or the standard deviation? And GPT-4 will just give a very nice output. But let's just see the activity itself. Still have time. What concept is more important, the concept of the mean or the concept of the standard deviation? Should be order. A first-year college student reads in a textbook chapter that the concept of standard deviation, a new disciplinary knowledge, is important to understand statistics. While reading, the student remembers that in a previous chapter, they read that the concept of arithmetic mean is important to understand statistics. Pretty much more. You are saying that is standard deviation, but you just said that it is the mean. So there is some conflict here. Which of the two is the most important? So as an assignment, the student writes an opinion essay expressing their opinion about which of the two concepts is more important for understanding statistics. Which concept will the student select? So I think the concept of mean or standard deviation is the most important because A, B, C, or D. That would be the essay. But I asked also, no, Philip asked also GPT-4 and see what the answer was. And this was the answer of GPT-4. I just did a snapshot. What concept is more important, the concept of the mean or the concept of the standard deviation? And GPT-4 very wisely and very precisely answered this. The concept of the mean and the standard deviation are both important in statistics and data analysis. I didn't ask about data analysis, but they serve different purposes. I just amplify this here. And all the quote-unquote essay produced by GPT-4. However, this is what the student wrote. Although the concept of standard deviation is important, understanding the concept of arithmetic mean is more important because the latter is required to understand the former. So totally in opposite. Should be the. This is the answer of the student, and this is the answer of ChatGPT. And this is what I did. I took this answer and estimated that entropy given the previous writing samples of the student. And I asked the model, given that free energy concept, free energy model, what the probability was that this answer was produced by a system with this entropy, with this phenotype. And then I asked, well, what is the probability that this answer was produced by this organism, by the phenotype? And the probability that the model gave me was this one. So it is highly unlikely, given this impossible, sample size 1, just as an example, that this production, very nice, was produced by this system, whereas this production was 0.99% probably.
Take the chat.
No. Actually, I didn't take ChatGPT because that's the devil. No, I don't. I didn't. Just one sample. Just one sample. I mean, this is not systematic. It's not just systematic. But I don't use ChatGPT. So this is why I needed help. But I wanted to make the point that with the entropy value with the model, we are able to estimate a kind of phenotype of the organism, in this case of the writer. And given that phenotype, we can then interrogate the model and ask whether specific production has been, what is the probability that specific production has been produced by this organism. And for example, if here I am just going one step forward. If I want to know whether the student cheated and went to GPT-4 and it had already collected all the samples and estimated the entropy value, I can readily, if this is consistent across, I mean, with all the statistical rigorosity, I can detect whether this production has been written or spoken by this organism against this one. This is one implication that I can see from this model. What we still need to do, and this is our current work, is to, because we did it in terms of the neuroscience of it, we did it with schizophrenia and with spoken language. Now we need to, and we are in that process, and Nick is gladly joining me in one part of the project, creating the setting to investigate the neural correlates and see whether those regions that I already identified in schizophrenia are exactly the same regions that happen with the entropy value when it comes to writing. This is the one of the implications. There are others that we are starting to investigate right now. What the role of neurotransmission is, I mean, we need to investigate what is the neurotransmitter responsible for this epistemic effect or the superiority effect of writing, if it is an excitatory neurotransmitter, for example, glutamate, or it is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. I mean, we have different ways to do that. One more direct using spectroscopy, other more indirect using simulations, but we can do it. Second, there is variability. So we have just done this with pretty much native speakers of English as a native language. So we don't know what the effect could be in other languages. You have already noticed my funny accent. So you don't know where my analytic thinking score or my level of entropy actually reflect my conceptual organization given only this English that I speak, for example. That's another. And all happens, applies also with other cultural factors, gender, other cultures, etc. So that's another interesting point that we look forward to investigating with the theoretical framework. So this one, the fourth, is the one that I have already noticed. And fifth, and is very, very appealing, this schizophrenia and other disorders share some common symptoms. I don't mean that ADHD, this example, is close to schizophrenia, but there are symptoms that overlap. If we refine the method and the theoretical proposal, we will be able to investigate what we have already investigated in schizophrenia in other disorders, for example, neurodevelopmental disorders such as ADHD or autism. That is one of the future works that we have in the agenda. And to do that, we need to create a more reliable setting. I mean, for speaking language, we can place and control somehow a subject inside an MRI scanner and ask the subject to speak. But that is not possible with writing inside the scanner. But we have another technique, which is functional near-infrared spectroscopy. We have this equipment in the agenda to buy it if we get the money from the grants. Hopefully we will, but it's a competition, we'll wait for that. With that, we can put those cables in the skull of the writers and investigate what's going on in their brain, at least indirectly, when they write, and then use that same model that we use with schizophrenia, but this time with writing. We will soon start using other techniques, for example, eye tracking and electrodermal conductance as indirect measures of uncertainty. And that uncertainty is no more than entropy, but expressed in other terms, and use those signals and indirect biological markers of entropy while students write. These are the nearest point in the agenda of the Writing Brain Laboratory, which I am establishing happily in the Department of Psychology, the Faculty of Science, Brandon University, after moving from London, Ontario, around the corner. And with this, I reach the end of the talk, and you can be assured that my conceptual organization changed while I spoke here. So the one I have now is not the same that the one that you heard. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. We do have time for some questions now, and Pam is going to bring around some microphones for you to speak into for the people who are online.
Hi, thank you. That's just, I work in writing, so this is really, it's lighting up more than one center in my brain right now, I think.
Hopefully not the uncertainty region.
Yeah, hopefully not. Although my question is around have you looked at controlling for hand writing by hand versus typing on a computer? And how about the variable of predictive text, or like a milder form of AI being introduced in that in the writing environment?
I didn't hear the second part. Let me answer first the first part, and then I will ask you to refer the second one. I haven't worked directly with handwriting and typing, but I have read a few papers, especially last one was using no spectroscopy, but also about using EEG, and there are differences. And believe it or not, the differences point to an advantage of handwriting, given that data. So whether that data is replicable or generalizable, that's another issue. But the initial findings point to in that direction. And the second part, sorry, was?
The second part I was wondering about is if you've thought about how in a typing environment that mild forms of AI, such as predictive text, have been normalized, really.
Something like
Yeah.
when I work in Word.
When you're working in Word and it's predicting.
No, I haven't done
words
that.
for you.
I
Yeah.
haven't done that. But interesting. I mean, all right.
Behind you there.
Okay, so when you're comparing speaking and writing, in my mind, the most useful way to actually learn something is application of the knowledge. And what I mean by that is you used your Pythagorean theorem example. Instead of just explaining what the Pythagorean theorem is, the hypotenuse of the triangle is this number, one side is that number, what's the other side? Being able to solve those kinds of problems to me is superior to either one of those. And
Yep, I agree. Basically, there is no contradiction in that sense, because when applying that, the person is producing language. Even though the language is not verbalized, or it's not a motor expression of the language, what they are thinking, and the reasoning process is also language. But this is no more than a speculation in terms of the cause. It is, I mean, at least off the top of my head, it would be easy to set an experiment testing a hypothesis with and without, but in systematic ways, and see what happens, whether applying the direct Pythagorean theorem in a practical exercise is better, or there is an interaction with writing about it. Maybe there is an interaction. We don't know. I don't know. I haven't done it yet, because we are still at the very beginning. I mean, the very first experimental evidence, saying experimental in the sense of that rigorous laboratory conditions, was the one that we published 2 years ago. That was awarded. So, but we're starting now to build upon it, and we can introduce more variables. One such would be a modality, for example, applying and writing, applying and speaking, or applying only, with ANOVA designs can be used to that. But it's a good hypothesis.
yeah, I guess mostly I agree. I mean, I'm sort of coming at this from a physics background and saying that I don't care if the student can regurgitate what the formula is unless they can apply it.
Makes sense?
Good. In computer science, we use formal languages to describe processes for a computer to execute. And we have immediate feedback on how well structured our thinking is. And so you'll often think you've articulated a thought well in a conversation or in a program, and it might take a year to get feedback in your life, but on a computer, you'll immediately hit a bug. And so you have an extremely rapid feedback cycle on the organization of your symbolic manipulation. We notice when you're learning a new language that you have quite a profound shift in your perspective of what's possible to think. And so I wonder if there'd be an opportunity to study students coming into the computer science department who haven't been exposed to this formal language, and we also notice that as you go further in, there's kind of like you described ADD as it's quite common in our field because you start noticing disjunctions in your own formal thought. They become perceptually available. Is that process of taking on language something that you've considered looking at here, or something that you see as available to you to measure?
So you mean taking on languages, programming languages?
Or other languages? You mentioned that English is a second language for you, and so there might be like an entropic mask to your communication because of that. So yes, like that's what gave me this idea. But you can take first, second year students or someone in another, you know what I mean? Like there's a trajectory there from step 0. And I wonder if that is something that you've considered as like a calibration.
What it can take, thank you very much for the question. What it can take from that is that you are just picturing a specific population, and we can use that specific population, one of the covariates, to include in the model. For example, one of the covariates that I just, here. So instead of saying cultural variability, disciplinary variability, for example, here. We can include that, yes. The model, I mean, these models are Bayesian models, causal models allowed to include many confoundings or potential confounders and isolate the confounder for the actual causes, because they are causal models. They are not traditional statistical models in that sense. And I guess you work with machine learning, right? Yeah, and the free energy principle is highly related to machine learning, but they use the upper bound of model evidence in a different way. So be more technical with that. So, but thank you very much. That's a specific population that can be included in experiments.
Okay, Dr. Rutherford's going to read a question from online.
Yeah, Francis asks, how does the free energy principle help us understand the cognitive processes involved in creative writing?
Well, Carl Fricton is the father of from University College London of the free energy principle. This one, not the thermodynamics. And he just wrote a paper about creativity and the free energy principle. And what happens here is that I need to reorganize my concepts to explain this without being more mathematics. Within the notion of free energy principle, there is another notion, which is the notion of the Markov blanket. Markov blanket is one specific arrangement in a Bayes network. So creative thinking is no more than moving the Markov blanket beyond the natural boundaries of the organism, in which we purposely set ourselves into an uncertain state. And by being in that uncertain state, that thinking out of the box or creativity is when that arises as the best possible action to bring the uncertain state to the expected or to the ideal state, which is a low uncertainty state. This is a little technical, but it's my first answer to how free energy explains creativity.
Yeah, thank you. Do any of Dr. Limongi's students have questions for him? You get to grill him now.
I guess they want to ask whether they get the grade. If I took note of their attendance here. No, they are my best students. I can guarantee that.
No, I have a question. My son, who's in grade 10, is just having his exams this week. I studied when I was a student, an undergrad student, by writing everything out. That's the only way I could learn, was by writing everything out. But he studies much better if I sit and ask him questions and he responds verbally. Is there any relation to that sort of difference in learning to what you're talking about today?
So individual variability counts here too. So, I mean, the fact that I am saying that writing has a a superiority effect compared to speaking is because we are talking about samples and the mean of the sample. It doesn't explain the variability. I mean, there are people, of course, that are more proficient and better learners when speaking than when writing, no doubt about it. So maybe that is the case. So, but we are just talking about averages between groups. So I don't want to say yes, that's the reason, but at least it is a possibility.
Something I've noticed since COVID. Just something I've noticed since COVID with him, where I've been very involved with his work, is he's a very speaking learning person, where I'm a very writing.
It might be.
Yeah.
Is that like generational as well?
Could be. Could be. Oh, we have a question here. Okay.
Scientific question because I'm not in science or psychology, but I have a lot of family that suffer from neurodevelopmental disorders, in particular ADHD. And I'm just wondering, from what you're saying, is one of the ways that we could help them perhaps is to get them to do writing as opposed to just talking? You suppose that would
Actually, there is an
increase their
intervention.
low uncertainty?
Yep, there is an intervention technique called, it is not epistemic writing, because it's not about knowledge, it's another type of journal, expressive writing, writing down their thoughts, their feelings. And by doing that, they might they might release space in their working memory, if we assume the cognitive psychologist's principle of working memory and attention, and then they can allocate those resources to an actual task. So by writing down their emotions, there is some possibility that they can leverage their working memory resources. And that is one intervention strategy.
Perhaps bringing their thoughts back together so there isn't so much uncertainty?
Yeah, because I mean, if we go to the vernaculars of free energy, we define attention disorders as a special case of high uncertainty. All right.
Okay, we're a couple minutes past 3:30, and I see people are getting ready to leave and having to leave. I know people have to pick up kids and all those kind of things. So would everyone please give another thanks to Dr. Limongi?
No, thank you.